to go through this FBI report that was just issued. This is a report that we've been talking a lot about and anticipating for a very long time, and it finally came 16 months after the shooting, and it's a bit underwhelming in its weight. It's 2.5 pages. It's called Key Findings of the Behavioral Analysis Unit's Las Vegas Review Panel. We'll get into exactly what that unit does and talk about this panel and who was on the panel. It's kind of a mystery as to who was on the panel. And also, is this really it? After 16 months, hundreds of agents on it, dozens of offices involved, is this really all the FBI intends to give us? Is this 2.5 pages of summary? So we thought to go over this. The absolute best person we could turn to, the man with more knowledge than even FBI agent in charge, Aaron Rouse. We bring in Mike Turber from a bunker in an undisclosed location. Mike, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate that. Thank you.
So,
Thank you for all the kind words.
I'm sure most of our listeners know you by following 5x5 News, that you're the producer and the host of, or they at least heard our episode that we did with you a couple months back on the Vegas shooting. You've done incredible work on the Vegas shooting, but just to remind everyone who Mike Turber is, we're still not sure we know exactly who he is, but what we apparently do know off of his LinkedIn, if you can believe that, he's former U.S. intelligence analyst, with a strong skill set in cybersecurity, surveillance, weapons, martial arts, digital forensics, et cetera, et cetera. He's a photographer, videographer, editor, journalist, detective, security expert, threat analyst, cybercrime expert, intelligence analyst, master scuba diver, martial artist, pilot, weapons specialist, forensic specialist, combat instructor, computer technology and systems integration manager. And I'm just getting started. Did I miss anything, Mike?
No, that sounded like enough. Not fair. That's I'm obviously unbelievable. Anyone watching this, their BS meter is way over here right now.
So, as I recall, we had kind of an open-ended mystery the last time you appeared, which was exactly why you're spending so much time on the Las Vegas shooting. I mean, we certainly appreciate the time that you put on it. And, you know, again, what you've uncovered is second to no one. But I did notice that you do state here that Mike was asked to assist in the largest mass shooting in United States history, and he jumped on the opportunity. Just to go back to that for a second, you were asked to assist by whom?
That you tried to get out of me last time. I can't say. I will never say who that is. It may come out later. I figured
it was after 5 o'clock. I thought you'd have a couple of cocktails by now, and then I could get it out of you by now. No?
Yeah, if I was sitting right there next to you, I don't know, maybe you could get it out of me, but not this time.
But I think you did.
But no, it's a longtime friend of mine.
A longtime friend of yours. I think you did last time that you have been working with some of the victims' attorneys, though.
Yeah, well, the term working with or for has been thrown about, and I want to make certain that we're real clear. What I do is if I get a piece of evidence that is almost basically any piece of evidence is available to anyone that requests it. So I want to put that out there. But I do give evidence to different attorneys that I know are working with a certain client or certain aspect of the case requires something. So I do that. And that's basically how the ball game actually started, was with the original CCTV footage that I got that we shared with Kathleen Lombardo's office.
Okay. And I'm sure it's fair to say, generally speaking, you are on the side of the victims.
Absolutely.
You're not on the side of MGM, for instance.
No, sir.
You're not on the side of Stephen Paddock.
Am I on the side of Stephen Paddock? No.
I wouldn't think so. But you have been in touch with his brother, Eric, as I've been in touch with Bruce. And so we're gonna touch on that. We'll talk a bit about what's going on with the case. I was on Laura Ingraham this week with Brian Claypool, who was our very first guest on our deep dive on the Las Vegas shooter, and
Mhm.
he happened to appear with me on Laura Ingraham this week, talking about the FBI report, and he shared with me that there is a mediation scheduled for an undisclosed date in February. So things are getting interesting. February 19th, a little birdie told me. February, I'm going to make a note of that. So
Let me
let's
make
start.
sure it's not a Sunday. But yeah, it's hard.
So let's get flat out your initial reaction when you saw the report that came out this week.
Well, there's a couple of things, and actually, in talking to Eric last night, he actually had some rather smart things to say about it that actually opened my eyes up to a different way of looking at it. But when I opened up the report, it was amazingly fast to download. And when I saw the 3 pages and I saw the word summary, I thought, okay, well, this is like an index of what is going to come maybe in the next day or so. As time progressed, though, I started to find out that that might not be the case, that the summary may be it. And that is going to upset or has upset a lot of people, myself included. I was expecting ballistic analysis, a much more in-depth BAU report than this one. And here's the difference in what I've found out. This is not really a BAU report. This is more or less
analysis unit.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The behavioral analysis unit. What happened is they acquired 25 people that had different skill sets, all the way from psychologists, psychiatrists, and blah blah blah, different.
So that is the Las Vegas review panel, the LVRP that they refer to. That your understanding is approximately 25 people.
Correct. Now the 25, I've been told 25 people are working on this, and then I read somewhere where it was X number of people that were working on this part of the report, and I thought it was 25. So that number may not be exactly correct. So I'll try to verify that. But basically, you have the Las Vegas review panel, and the key word here that Eric brought to my attention last night is the word review. They were not the Las Vegas investigative panel. They were the review panel. So we're basically reading things from someone who reviewed things. Because the first question I asked Eric yesterday, I said, Eric, let me ask you this. Over the 15, 16 months or so since the shooting, and they've put this review panel together, and there's, say, 25 people on the review panel, whatever number it is, doesn't matter, but for this question, out of all of those people and out of all this time, I'm kind of curious as to how many interviews they had with you to get information about your brother. The answer was a whopping goose egg. Not once was he contacted by anyone as a member of the Las Vegas review panel to ask information that I would think would be normal to ask if someone's going to try to gather information, what have you. But he did remind me that this is a review panel. They're reviewing things that have already been done, which kind of makes sense.
Because he was interviewed extensively by the FBI.
He was interviewed for about 15 hours. That was the extent of it. And
so
a lot of that was already
this panel had access to the notes, transcript, etc., of his interview.
Correct. I'm sure they would. I would hope that they would, but we don't know. We don't know if they had access to anything. This is very ambiguous and vague, and it doesn't really get into. Let me ask you this
question: are you familiar with the BAU, Behavioral Analysis Unit, and have you seen other reports from them from other similar situations?
I've seen reports from the BAU itself, not meaning a panel of outside professionals that were put together and probably
so that part that part seems unique to you, the idea that they put together a panel.
Well, they've done this before, but at this level, No, it just seemed funny because if you read the first part there, it says the BAU was asked to examine possible motives behind Paddock's shooting and identify Paddock's pre-attack behaviors. So what they did was the BAU, instead of doing that work themselves, they acquired a panel and put the panel together and had the panel essentially review that work or the investigation that was done before. And where this is a little different, and that we have to take into consideration too, the FBI was not the lead on this case. It was LVMPD that was kept as the lead, and FBI was acting in a supportive role as far as analyzing the evidence and things of that nature. So that's where it's a little different than what we're probably used to seeing with, like, the Sandy Hook case or some of the other cases where you have a mountain of paperwork that comes out and you have over 1,000 pages to 1,500 pages. Yeah.
So your assessment may be that in this case, FBI devoted fewer resources to this shooting than to, say, Sandy Hook or others.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that, to be safe, I would say that would be an accurate statement, because since they were more of a supportive role, but because of the massive amount of evidence that was acquired and shipped off to Quantico for the lab testing and what have you, I would say that in that regard, as far as the actual testing is concerned of actual physical evidence, that was probably larger than what some of the other cases have been. But we don't know. We don't have any conclusive report or statistics telling us, in comparison to other events of this nature, how does this stack up, so to speak? Not that we're trying to weigh them out, but naturally we're human. We do that.
But we do have a couple pretty extensive reports from the Las Vegas police, and FBI played presumably a supporting role in those reports, right?
Correct.
So, and the main piece that was missing from the Las Vegas reports was motive. And they did almost seem to kind of punt motive to the behavioral analysis unit of the FBI. And so now what you have is their assessment as to motive. What's really missing, it seems to me, is the support for their conclusions. And we'll get into that because they don't really provide this. There's some very important conclusions that they make. I do think that they identify motive in this. For some reason, mainstream media's take on the whole thing was FBI report comes out and they find no motive. Well, that's not my assessment. And if I was given the opportunity on Laura Ingraham to answer a second question, because I only got one, I would have done that. But that was not the angle she wanted anyway. She and Hannity and others on Fox News were taking the position that the big takeaway was there's no motive. Well, to the contrary, I find incredibly important takeaways. For instance, that the LVRP, the Las Vegas Review Panel, concludes, the panel concludes that Paddock's attack was neither directed, inspired, nor enabled by ideologically motivated persons or groups. In other words, they're saying that this panel of these 25 diverse people, including psychologists and psychiatrists, etc., are the ones that concluded that ISIS had nothing to do with this? That's strange.
That is kind of strange, because that brings on a whole nother level, because what I don't see in here, and to go through that list of panelists, the multidisciplinary panel was comprised of experts in threat assessment, psychology, psychiatry, research, cyber behavioral analysis, law, and child sexual exploitation. I do not see in there anyone that is foreign intelligence or any type of intelligence. The closest thing I see would be the words threat assessment, and possibly something else. But one just is a researcher that doesn't say what they've done. So we have no idea these people's qualifications. We don't know their backgrounds. We don't know if their backgrounds fit or if their backgrounds would allow them to even think about an ISIS component to this.
I mean, I think that just is, it appears to me to be perhaps just sloppy writing, because it would have been the FBI itself, I would think, that would make the conclusion that
Right.
ISIS was not involved, not this panel. And by the way, for listeners, you can find the FBI's report. If you go to our Facebook page, you'll see a link to it there. But what do you think? Is that just sloppy writing to say that it was
Well,
the panel that concluded ISIS is not involved?
What's amazing to me is that they got this much into 3 pages or 2.5 pages. And with all of that, as we go back and we start looking, as I read it a second, third, fourth, and fifth time, and amazingly, we can read them 3, 5, 10 times a day easily because this thing is ridiculous. But, my assessment from this is that they've acquired a group of people so that they can say that they covered their basis on various aspects of law and other regions of exploratory research, we'll put it that way, because essentially this is nothing more than research. Again, like Eric reminded me yesterday, it's a research panel. They're not an investigative panel. So an investigative panel would have a lot more supportive evidence to go along with it because it's a scientific process that they go through. And it's peer reviewed and what have you. But this here doesn't appear to be anything. We don't know who these people are. We don't know their qualifications, and we don't have any supportive documentation to come along with this. I would think this as being a summary is fine. This is a summary. We can read this for the Cliff Notes version of what's to come, or the Cliff Notes version of what we should have received, like a 1,200-page report that says blah, blah, blah. At this date, he had this problem and what have you. But no, but as far as the motive is concerned, we're in agreement.
Yeah. So it's odd for them to say it was the Las Vegas review panel that made this conclusion about lack of ISIS. Number one. Number two, that is a really, really important conclusion for the FBI to make, that he acted alone and that there was no terror element to this, because ISIS, as we know, claimed responsibility twice. They did it through their official, is it called Nasher, their official PR organization. And I spoke to terror experts. I know there's some disagreement about this, but I spoke to terror experts that say that anytime ISIS has claimed responsibility for an attack through their official PR propaganda channels, it has never been proven that they were not, in fact, responsible for the attack. In other words, this would have been the first time. I see the face you're making. You may be one of the experts that don't agree with that.
Yeah.
But there's a Varian Khan, if you know her, had her on, and she claims to be an ISIS expert. She definitively states that. I know there was an issue of an attack in the Philippines that that ISIS took responsibility for, and there was question about whether or not they in fact carried it out. In fact, and remember, there's a difference between carrying it out and being ISIS inspired, right?
Correct.
So she would say that there's never been a circumstance where it's proven that ISIS didn't carry it out or that it was ISIS inspired. And Vegas one would be the first one if the FBI has in fact drawn that conclusion.
I actually agree that ISIS had no play in this from what I can see, but I don't have access to the exact same information they do. But based on the people that I know in the talking in the inner circles and listening on different areas that we talk about, and make sure it's not up on the screen somewhere. But as far as ISIS being a component, there's no indication at all. I mean,
I totally agree with that, Mike.
Sorry,
I totally agree with that. The main point I'm making, though, is that what's important about that is, they claimed
this will be the first time.
Exactly. 100% proven by the FBI that ISIS made a false claim, which, people were speculating at the time that this indicates something significant about the degradation of ISIS and where they are today, that they need to be very careful about making claims of responsibility. And now they've gotten a lot looser as perhaps they're on the run.
And that's a fair assessment. And I would agree with that. And that the ISIS organization has, I wouldn't say this disbanded, but it's definitely disorganized. And I don't think it's as organized as when she made her assessment that this was ISIS inspired, or if ISIS inspired or ISIS carried this out, that this would be the first time that they claimed something and it didn't become true, or wasn't true. And the way I look at it is this: this is the largest mass shooting in U.S. history. The only thing that we can think of that probably impacted our country as much as this did in the past 20 years is obviously the 9/11. So if you draw the two conclusions back and forth, and you want to say that they made the claim and that they have 100% track record of being accurate, I would say that this would make sense that it would be the one that they would mess up on, because they would want to claim this. This is the largest. This is something that they would want to have under their belt, so to speak.
Well, another thing she said is that they would, at least historically, they would not make the claim unless they had some reason to believe that it was at least inspired. So they may have been misled, gotten some bad information, because if you remember how quickly they claimed responsibility, if this was all just BS, they didn't know that ultimately a suicide note wasn't going to be found, or that it turns out, we didn't find any clear motive for Paddock on this. It could have been found out very quickly exactly why he did it, and it could have been, their claim could have been disproven very quickly.
That's true. And another way to look at it is from the standpoint that they made that claim very quickly without having any foreknowledge or any knowledge of anything. But keep in mind that they had already claimed months before that Las Vegas was a target. And Las Vegas was in one of the videos, one of the propaganda videos that they put out. They naturally showed different locations, a guy driving around and aiming the camera out the window and seeing, different hotels and different landmarks that we all recognize. So we knew that Las Vegas was a potential target, and for it to have something happen of this nature, who knows if someone jumped the gun and said this must be it, or you have cells that operate that sleeper cells that pop up and they do what they do, and whatever triggers them to start. I mean, it could be all over the map. Was this that? I honestly don't think so. Again, on our side, as far as what we have to look at is there's nothing that we've seen. Granted, I'm not in there pulling pieces of paper and doing the investigation from the inside. If they're covering it up, it'd be one of the worst things they could possibly do. But if everything they're telling us is true, and there absolutely is no evidence to support any ISIS connection at all, which is also what I'm getting to when I talk to other people I know, then this would be the first time that they're wrong. And I've said that since day one.
So all I'm saying is that we turn to the FBI. That's who we trust to chase this down and determine whether this was terror or not, whether this was ISIS or not. So they concluded that it was not. That's great, but just give us a little bit of the basis for that conclusion, because I'm sure that was kind of the primary reason the FBI was involved, was to determine, is this another ISIS attack, radical Islamic terrorism on U.S. soil? Is it or is it not? And if they concluded that it's not, give us some of the basis for it, because you must have spent hundreds of thousands of hours looking into it.
Yeah, well, I think I gave you the basis for it. The basis for it is they didn't find anything. And so it's trying to prove a non-event and is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, so, well, you could say you tracked down various leads and you looked at this and you looked into that and so forth. I mean,
they didn't even have that. That's the problem. They didn't even really have those leads to go tracking down. And that's the thing. So if they don't even have that,
had an analysis of the ISIS claims of responsibility and explained, that, hey, we looked into the fact that they claimed responsibility, and it was our conclusion that the claim emanated from such and such or this or that, and this is our theory as to why they claimed responsibility, when in fact it turned out not to be correct. And
I mean, they did briefly talk about the claim and what have you early on. But they pretty much swept that under the rug because that's something that they're told not to really discuss much. I mean, if they had something to do with it, yeah, we'll take measures in our
Okay,
hands
let's move on. Let's move on
Sure.
to the next big conclusion that I have highlighted, which is, again, they attribute the panel for this conclusion, which I think is inappropriate, but they say the LVRP further assesses that Paddock conspired with no one; he acted alone. Now,
Right.
for many people, primarily people who were actually at the event, who are absolutely convinced that he did not act alone, that he was not the sole shooter, that they heard shots coming from different directions, not to mention you've got the reports of other shootings down the strip, etc. All kinds of reports. But, in my experience and talking to people that were there, and you've probably spoken to as many or more than I have, the majority of people that were there are convinced that there was more than one. I'm not suggesting that there was more than one. In fact, I think it appears to be there wasn't more than one. It was just Paddock. But help those people out. Give them some information. Say that you investigated these claims of multiple shooters. Tell us a little bit. Give us a little meat on the bone of this conclusion that Paddock did this by himself.
Well, and that's something that they should have done. And what is odd is that because we received virtually no information in the beginning, we found ourselves doing our own investigations, myself included. We go there, we talk to people, we look for evidence, and we analyze what we can. I have a background where I can analyze evidence. I may be an expert in one field, not in another, but I've learned enough to know, and I basically became one in several areas that I've never really studied as much as I probably should have in the past. One of which would be the ballistic analysis as far as the acoustic analysis of any of the gunfire. As far as that is concerned, and with all of the cameras and the footage that we have, and also now we throw in several hundred body-worn camera footage or different videos from different officers and all around the venue, there's not any shots fired from any other direction. That if a shot was fired, we would hear it. And of course, somebody will say, well, they had silencers. Well, okay, if they had silencers, you can still hear it. If anyone ever shot one, if it's a subsonic with a silencer, okay. But as far as I can tell from the hundreds of hours of video that I've looked at and subsequently pulled the audio out, there was none. There's no other shots fired from any other direction. The only shots that were fired that night were fired inside that room by two people.
And you would assume that the FBI did similar analysis to what you did?
Yeah, I'm sure they did. And it's tedious to do. You're basically doing a lot of math work, and they may have access to the shot spotter that may or may not be there, depending on who you're talking to at the moment. But if they have that, then the math is already done for you. But basically, it's a series of calculations, and you determine from those series of calculations where the shots were fired from. And you can do that with cameras, camera footage from cell phone cameras or whatever, as long as you know the model or the type of the camera, and you take into some consideration the variances between them. You can calculate it pretty accurately. I mean, we were able to do that. Another person who came on early on and who did some rather amazing animation work, which is actually on my page. If you go to the 5x5 News channel, you'll see some animation that was done by a person using the channel name Mr. Visual. Absolutely excellent work. I cannot debunk any of it. It's very accurate. And he puts into a visual 3D animated depiction on the screen, as far as the video is concerned, of exactly how the sounds that we hear and exactly where the bullets went and how we can determine where they went and how all these different things. He does it visually, so it's very easy to learn from that. And I think that would be a good thing for everybody to see.
So going back to Eric Paddock, who brother of the shooter, who you spoke to extensively yesterday, give me again a little bit about what his thoughts were and after reading.
Yeah, we went through, and I'll put that that interview out. It's probably, you know, we spoke for 2.5 hours, so I'll probably chop it down to something a little bit more palatable, because we kind of bounce around, and just like two guys talking, and so I kept it more casual rather than a stern question answer period, and that's kind of how I like to operate anyway. But we went through the list. Actually, he went through the list, and before he started, I basically wanted to ask him the question of, out of the number of people that may put this report together, and not one of them, I want to reiterate this. This is a very important point. He was never contacted. And of all the people that are out there that you would contact to find out at different parts of information, I would like to know the reason why they didn't. But again, it's a research panel, not an investigative panel. So they were looking at things that had already been acquired. So that's my assessment from what Eric told me. And when he said that, it totally changed my way of thinking of this report. This report is a research paper. It's not a investigative paper.
Did he seem to generally agree with the findings when we get down to the specifics of what they identified as Stephen Paddock's motive?
I would say, for the most part, if you reduced it to something fairly simple and using Occam's razor or what have you, then yeah, we're pretty much in alignment. There are some variances that when it gets into certain specifics, when they try to mention specifics on here, as far as time frame, when did this start? When did the thought process start? What was the catalyst that caused this to occur? And the time frame is something that Eric and I are working on, is to look for little clues that may pop up here and there, because he has obviously access to everything that Stephen had done. Dates of purchases of the weapons and things of this nature that have already been put out there. But at the same time, there's different changes in how people operate. One thing, if someone has a consistent calling record where they call you once a month, or they do this or that, and all of a sudden that changes, then that gives you an idea of something might be going on. So you call them and see what's going on. None of that really happened, because there wasn't that much communication between pretty much any of the family to some degree. So that's not something that we would normally go by. Like you and I would probably say, oh yeah, I call my mom, once a week or once every few days or whatever. And then if 3 months goes by and you don't call your mom's probably freaking out and calling you, trying to find out what's going on. That wasn't the case here. So it's a little bit off from the norm.
It seems to me that they're ascribing about a 1 year period of planning, because that's when he really started acquiring all the weapons. And they do refer to, they make this rather kind of eerie conclusion or statement: the planning and preparation in and of itself was likely satisfying to Paddock, as it provided a sense of direction and control despite his mental and physical decline. So they're basically saying that, it starts with them saying that he had a decline in physical and mental health, level of functioning, and financial status over the last several years of his life. In reaction to this decline, he concluded that he would seek to control the ending of his life via a suicidal act. So it seems to me they're basically saying, you have a narcissist, you have perhaps a psychopath, certainly runs in the family. When you have declining wealth and health with that, I could see how that would make sense that a narcissist would not want to continue to live with declining money and health. And so he basically starts thinking about suicide, but decides to also go out with one big grand act, this massacre on a level never seen before. So he goes out with infamy, and that
and that's where this report
for a year.
Yeah, and whether now the question of whether or not this is the answer I'm going to give you now is actually from Eric. His statement essentially is this: if Steve wanted to be famous, then Steve would have written a book, or Steve would have written something or done something other than this, that after the fact that would make him famous, that people would read forever, like like the manifesto that we have from Kaczynski or something along those lines. But he didn't do that. He wasn't the word infamy, and there was a couple other words that were thrown around on a couple of websites that were not from the BAU report. That,
sorry, infamy is in the report.
Yeah, infamy. But there's what I'm saying is there's a couple other words that were used that are not accurate. That he had some zeal for murder or carnage. I think that zeal for carnage was used on one of the pages. But anyway, that's away from the report. But yes, those were factors that were, and as far as I'm concerned, and it seems like Eric's in alignment. I think Eric and I are almost straight down the middle as far as what we believe amongst each other.
But hold on a second. I thought you were saying that Eric says he doesn't think his brother was motivated by infamy, because if he was, he would have written some manifesto.
No. Exactly. It wasn't motivated by that. But as far as the other things that occurred, as far as the decline in physical health, as far as some of the other things, then yeah, that makes sense. It goes into play. And here's the case in point. Steve loved to fly. And when he sold his airplane for one reason, because he could not pass the flight physical, because he could not take the the blood pressure medication, because it affected him. He reacted to it. So that was a problem. And whenever you take away someone's passion or someone's whatever they have to escape, then they start losing reasons to live. He started to become socially. He was pulling back. He's pulling back away from Mary Lou Danley. I mean, she made mention of that over the last year or so. So that was a contributing factor.
Did he pull back from Eric, by the way?
Well, the thing with Eric is that their relationship was, not that brotherly love. Hey, buddy, what you doing? Blah, 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 that kind of thing. It was more of if there was a reason to call, and this is essentially what Eric says, and you'll hear it, but his deal is if there was a reason to call, they would call. And a lot of times it was more business transactional related things. It wasn't, hey, how you doing? I was just thinking about you, hey, good luck tomorrow and whatever you're doing, that kind of thing.
But as far as frequency of that type of interaction, though, essentially remained constant from Eric's recollection over the past couple of years?
Yeah, from that standpoint, there was no sign that Eric received from Steve that this was inevitable, or something was going on, or something was different, something was amiss. And I think part of that may have to do with the fact that they didn't communicate as often as, say, some other families would. Right. But that's a component of this.
So he's agreeing with the health thing, the suicide part, et cetera. He's not agreeing with the infamy. So what is his theory then as to why his brother chose to take out 58 people with himself?
He wanted to get back at the casinos. I think the predominant factor that weighed in his mind was that Steve was losing his lifestyle. He, whether it was from a health-related issue, or whether it was from money, or whether from the casinos, you combine all that together, then essentially his entire lifestyle was being pulled away. The casinos were screwing him, is the way he felt about it, because they were changing how the cops are paid.
Exactly. So I'm going to interrupt there, because I saw that, and people should go check out your 5x5 News on YouTube, because you have a clip of an Eric Paddock interview where he talks about Paddock's gambling style, the types of machines he played, how he would effectively, to some extent, beat the house by playing at max odds and getting max points, and the casinos kind of started changing that on him. And sure enough, he did start losing. And so that was the reason I asked that. So it's Eric's theory that he was really pissed off at the casinos for the way they started treating him, and he was getting back at them.
Yes, that's the thing. It wasn't any specific casino that was in the mix, and all of these. There's a lot of different theories out there as to him. Why did he go to this other location to to check it out, or all these different things. But as far as him getting back at the gambling industry as a whole, not necessarily MGM, but just the gambling industry. And this is Eric's words as well. Basically, he accomplished that. That was probably a thought in his mind that it would make sense, based on Eric knowing, obviously, Steve his whole life. That, yeah, that's a way of doing it. But as messed up as that sounds, we don't think the way Steve was thinking. And it's probably a good thing, but since we don't think that way, it's hard for us to put this together. It's hard for us to accept it. It was definitely hard for us to accept no motive, because there's no specific one thing to point to. It's I don't want to use the word anticlimactic, but when you're looking for something and you find it and you have that eureka moment that, aha, we're not going to get that here. So, and Eric, basically goes into this area as well with the interview I had with him last night, is that, Steve's unique. This report tried to put Steve into a category of being just like the others. I don't think anyone watching this right now is going to say that this event was anything like any other mass shooting event that we have ever witnessed. And that would mean that the individual pulling it off is also in an area that kind of, and I'm not putting him on a grandstand. I'm not making this a worship kind of thing or anything like that. It's just that we have to put him into a different category, because this seems to be, or possibly could be, a new trend. There was a shooting the other day, no motive found. And who knows what sets people off internally. And when they exercise that feeling of doing what it is that's going on through their mind, we don't know what that thought process is. Maybe some wonderful psychiatrist and psychologist somewhere can get together and say, okay, here's the signs that we're going to find. And if you look at the report here, it says an average of 3.6 stressors prior to the attack. I don't remember having any number of stressors, but 3.6 stressors prior to an attack, display an average of 4.7 concerning behaviors to others. I mean, this is,
yeah, they cite a study.
The number 10 is, yeah.
Yeah, the report cites a study from a few years ago where it says that a study of the pre-attack behaviors of active shooters in the United States between 2000 and 2013. It was an FBI report, and overall the point being that typically shooters aren't responding to one thing, that there are multiple things. And I think that's seemed to be the point that they were making, that, hey guys, just because we haven't identified a specific reason, here's the reason why Stephen Paddock did it, is because, well, that's actually more common than people think, that actually usually it isn't just one thing that motivates a shooter.
And I absolutely agree with that. I mean, there's normally some sort of event that happens that causes them to go that direction, but then the rest of the things that come in become all convoluted and mixed together. So at the end, unless they leave a note telling us exactly what happened and why and all these different things, we don't know.
Yeah. So I'm not sure
that was
support Eric's theory about getting back at Vegas for a couple of reasons. One being that we know that he scoped out Lollapalooza in Chicago. He scoped out Fenway Park in Boston. He scoped out Santa Monica Pier, and his Google searches demonstrated that he was looking for large crowds, and they didn't have to be in Las Vegas. Doesn't that in and of itself kind of shoot down Eric's theory?
No. And the reason why it doesn't is because early on, before I even talked to Eric, one of the things that I was trying to come up with is a reason why he would go to those other venues. And part of that would be to study the security or how people react to things and various things like that. Was he actually looking for a perch to get up into, to fire down on a crowd? We don't really know that. Was he there testing how people respond to him carrying massive amounts of bags up into a room? I mean, That's a possibility. You know, you want to test hotel security. You want to test outdoor security. You want to see how the valet
Yeah, but you
reacts.
would test it at the place that you're going to do it. You're not going to test it at Fenway Park or at the Santa Monica Pier to see how Mandalay
Right.
Bay in Vegas is going to respond.
And who's to say that he didn't? We don't know. We don't know of all the previous times that he visited Mandalay Bay, how many bags did he bring there? We know he brought a lot of bags to the Ogden, but we don't know if he did that at Mandalay Bay. And keep in mind, he was within driving distance of Mandalay Bay and the Ogden and any other place that he went to in Vegas. So at some point in time in the past, he could have brought several large bags with him and tested it there to some degree. But these are questions that I would like to know the answer to.
We'll never know. But my read is that he was looking for mass carnage. So he was looking at spots where he's going to do massive carnage. If it was about taking out in Vegas, I would almost argue the opposite of Eric, that he'd be more inclined to have left a note if it was about taking it out on Vegas as opposed to infamy. You don't need to write a note for infamy. You got the infamy. You know, he didn't care enough about that. Yeah. He knew. Yeah. If he took out X number of people, he would be the largest mass shooter in American history. And that is the infamy. What note do you need to write about that?
Well, and to use the vernacular of Eric, Steve loved fucking with people. And that was the thing that stuck in my mind when Eric was talking to me, is that what better way to do that than to not leave a note, to not do the things that are somewhat expected. And that's apparently what he did.
And more infamy comes with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And is the infamy a byproduct of what he did, or is infamy the product of what he was trying to achieve? That's another question. We don't really know. Was he trying to achieve infamy? Eric seems to say no. We don't know. There's nothing that tells us either way.
Yeah. You've got this anecdotal stuff that I've read, some of these prostitutes that were interviewed. So you got to take it with a grain of salt, but where, you know, he would like to talk about how I'm a bad man. I'm a bad man. Mm-hmm. He would kind of almost brag about the fact that his father was on the FBI's most wanted list.
Right. Right. You know, and with that, you know, I have to go and look at that evidence separately to see if those were things that were in fact said and those are things that are in fact done. I don't have a real reason to doubt it. I think the one prostitute's name is Michaela or something like that. Her story seems to be fairly accurate, but I haven't been able to go to, say, Mary Lou Danley and say, hey, did Steve like rough, you know, was he this way? You know, and I didn't have that. And so since we don't really know, there's a lot of things we don't know, and a lot of things where people, you know, in these situations, they get involved into an investigation of this nature, and for whatever reason, whatever the motivation is, because there's a lot of things that were said that just absolutely were not Steve. One guy called into a radio station basically saying that he remembers going, he lived next door, but he had moved, I think 9 months previous, and he would come home and Steve would be sitting on a lawn chair out in the front of his garage, waving hi to the neighbors as they came by and went home drinking a beer. That's not Steve. So, but, you know, so you have to take some of these things with a grain of salt. And that's why I went when I talked to Eric, I kind of get an idea of who Steve is. It helped me get into the mindset of possibly what he was doing that last few minutes on Earth that he was here. And it kind of helped me walk through the last minute of what I felt like he did as far as going into the room, pulling the weapons and stuff. But that's another subject. But yeah, I think between Eric's assessment and between the assessment that we have here, a lot of people can probably draw a conclusion of what's actually a more accurate picture. So I think combine this with this show, with the interview that we have with Eric, and also the documentary that we're coming out with, which is Vegas Wrong. That documentary should be out here hopefully within a couple months, finalizing some of the edits. And when that comes out, you'll get a better indication of maybe who who he was, and the documentary is not about him. It's about the whole event. But you'll hear from Eric. You'll hear from Eric probably tomorrow when I finalize the audio from yesterday, and it's starting to come together. That picture that you're always trying to paint whenever you're doing one of these things, you're trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together or paint the picture, whatever whatever cliche you want to use. But it's starting to make sense. Not make sense in that it made sense why he did things, but it starts to make sense that it didn't make sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, let's just touch on a couple quick things, and then, everybody should check out your interview with Eric. I can't wait to watch it, and looking forward to seeing that documentary when it comes out. Any lingering thoughts about MGM's security or lack thereof to stop this?
Yeah, that's one area that I pretty much that was my thing, was testing their security. And the problem I have with it is this: the entire city has an issue. The most prolific hotel in the city, as far as security is concerned, was the Wynn. And Mandalay Bay failed any of the penetration testing that I did. I got to go up the service elevators at will. Not one person, not one security person ever confronted me at Mandalay Bay, period, until that night at the Foundation Room. But that was a different thing. And I was all over the place. I've gone down in to where their offices are. I've gone through their employee entrance. I've gone up the service elevators. I've gone there with keys, without keys. I've made keys on my computer here and went up with those. I ran out of things to do. Yeah. So I started taking other people because I was like, okay, you're not going to believe this. And so I contact Laura Loomer. Laura, why don't you come with me? Let's go up the elevator. So,
well, let's
and other people.
Should they have prevented this from happening?
I don't know if they could prevent it from happening. I think that there are some systems and some things that could be put into place that would work a whole lot better. And I don't mean a tangible physical product. Every time I did any of the security testing that I did at the Wynn or Mandalay Bay, and I'm banned from the Wynn, by the way, is that what I found was it's always the people. The people are not properly trained. They've got all of this equipment. They've got all these different things to check people. They've got 3,300 cameras at Mandalay Bay. They've got a team of people. They're watching your every move and so forth, but they're not watching you in the hallways as you go back and forth to your room. They'll watch you in the elevator going up. That's it. But is there something that they could have done to prevent this? I don't think there's anything that anyone could do to prevent virtually anything if that person is bound and determined to do it. They'll find a way to get it done.
So Brian Claypool made a point on Laura Ingram's show that I think he thinks this is a conclusion he draws from the FBI report that he thinks is going to be helpful for his case, is when they talked about why did Paddock choose what he chose as far as a location. Right. They say that it suggests that his final selection was based on the identification of a tactically advantageous location from which to attack. So, absolutely. Yeah. So point being that, this should have been something that MGM gave more thought to. If this was such a perfect place for an attack, then someone should have been thinking, hey, we better be watching out for this type of thing. And I've made this point many times. When you've got 20,000 people at an event across the street from your 40 some odd story building, or 60 stories, whatever it is, and you're actually the one promoting the event, put some additional security in place at the hotel. I've never heard the answer to this, but I do not believe any additional security was in place.
I'm in agreement with that. I don't think at the actual hotel there was any additional security in place. I mean, they may say that there was. And at different times of the day, security goes on and off and what have you, because they know the times of heavy traffic and when, the normal time is going to be for someone to rob the place or what have you. So they've calculated all of those things. But as far as anything else, is there something they could have done? This, as far as the location, as far as him picking where he was going to do this act from, the same place that someone's going to pick that is the same place that someone's going to say that's such a beautiful view. What are you going to do? Are you going to remove the view? Are you going to make it where you have these huge bulletproof glass things? Are you going to make the glass itself bulletproof? You can't do that because people can't get out because of a fire, and there's a fire code that stipulates that. That's why that was the first thing I tested, or checked on was the glass.
Well, but you can choose not to have concerts directly below those type of buildings.
Yeah, open air venues, that's a problem. If you have a perch position, a high altitude, or a person that is shooting, or an active shooter from an elevated position, then that person can do a lot of things. And keep in mind too, a lot of people, they think that a great place to be is on top of a building or a tower or something like that. Actually, the best place to be is actually where he was, which is somewhat inside the mix of that tower, because you couldn't pick him out.
No, and it's my understanding that Las Vegas police in the past, for New Year's Eve, have considered that when the crowds are all out on the strip, they do put snipers up for the risk. Yep. My understanding that at Times Square at New Year's Eve, same thing. They put snipers up, and there was no snipers up for this one.
No, there weren't, and that's. You have to look at it too. I mean, if you compare, say, the Route 91 concert to, say, the EDC, which is the Electric Daisy Carnival, one has 22,000, the other one has 200,000. You have to measure these different events and then determine exactly what is appropriate. Of course, if we could put in all the systems in place that would probably prevent these events from happening, people wouldn't want to go to the events due to the amount of things they have to go through just to get in the door. And that's a very true statement. I feel that a lot of people, they see security one way or another. One, you and I would probably look at it and go, well, that's good that they're doing that. I feel safer.
Yeah. Okay. Last thing, give me your thoughts, if you could, Las Vegas police response, perhaps primarily the fact that we had these two officers that were there with about 5 minutes into the shooting, arguably could have stopped the shooting about halfway through, and seemed to have frozen on the 31st floor.
I have a huge problem with that. And plus, keep in mind that the specific officer that we're referring to that froze caused everyone else to freeze, because he's obviously a senior officer. He's a training officer. So this officer that froze is the officer that trains you on what to do. That's a problem.
Yeah, you make a good point about others taking his lead, because when you watch the video, it was him, it was a trainee Las Vegas police officer, and then it was 3 or 4 Mandalay Bay security guards, I believe, armed, and you could tell those guys were like chopping a bit to go, and he's holding them back. Yeah.
You saw the one Mandalay Bay officer with the black suited on tall guy standing there against that door, and he has his weapon at the ready, and he's just kind of like looking around like, what are we doing? What are we stopping for? You can literally see him, and what he's thinking. He's wondering, why are we stopped?
Yeah. And then Lombardo, the chief, gives the guy Hendricks a pass, 100% pass, by saying that you don't bring a knife to a gunfight.
Yeah, no.
So Lombardo would have done the same thing, apparently. When you're looking at that video and you're seeing Hendricks, just picture Lombardo there. That's who it is.
The problem is that there's no one in their right mind that would look at that and say that was okay, other than Sheriff Lombardo. So Sheriff Lombardo, if you ever watch this, one thing, you lied to me directly, verbally to me. I don't appreciate that. And 2, if you would have been there and you would have frozen, no, that's not acceptable. It's not a situation like that. It doesn't happen. Of course it does, but it shouldn't happen. That's the problem. And when it does happen, you don't give someone a pass. You basically show the others that, hey, the training needs to be harder, whatever needs to be done to make certain that this doesn't happen again. Did he do that? No, he gives the guy a pass. Come on.
Wake up, Las Vegas. You guys reelected him.